There are moments in life when communication does not come in the form of words, advice, or visible signs, but in something far deeper, more symbolic, and often more unsettling. These moments do not always demand immediate action in the physical sense, but they demand attention in the inner sense, a recognition that something is being conveyed beyond normal understanding. Something subtle yet persistent, something that does not fade easily, even when ignored. Dreams often exist in this space. Not every dream is random. Not every image seen during sleep is meaningless. And not every experience that fades upon waking is without significance. Some are reflections of the mind, yes, but others carry patterns that feel too structured, too repeated, too emotionally charged to be dismissed as coincidence. They linger, they echo, they return in fragments, sometimes days later, sometimes in unexpected moments of stillness. And when something refuses to disappear completely, it is worth paying attention, because silence is not always absence. Sometimes silence is communication without words. This is where discernment becomes essential. Where discernment becomes essential. Not every dream is meant to be acted upon, but some are meant to be understood. Some carry emotional weight that remains long after waking. Some leave impressions that feel heavier than imagination alone can explain. And in those moments, there is often a deeper message waiting to be recognized, not to create fear, but to create awareness, because awareness is the beginning of prevention. What is often overlooked is how repetition carries meaning. A single dream may be dismissed easily, but repeated patterns begin to form a message. Recurring symbols, recurring emotions, recurring scenarios. These are not always accidental. They often indicate something unresolved, something developing, or something requiring attention before it becomes more significant in reality. And when patterns repeat, ignoring them does not remove their meaning. It only delays understanding. There is a difference between imagination and instruction, between random thought and structured warning, between emotional processing and deeper communication. And the challenge is that both can feel similar on the surface. Both can appear strange, symbolic, or unclear at first glance. But their impact is different when recognized correctly. One fades quickly. The other stays until it is understood. This is why dreams that carry weight should not be dismissed too quickly. Because sometimes what is being shown is not what is happening now, but what is forming beneath the surface. A direction, a shift, a pattern developing quietly in thoughts, decisions, or environments. Something that may not yet be visible in physical reality, but is already taking shape internally. And awareness of this can make a difference, because understanding early signals allows for correction before consequences appear. It allows for reflection before outcomes solidify. It allows for adjustment before situations become harder to change. This is why certain dreams feel urgent, even when nothing in the physical world seems urgent. The urgency is not external, it is internal. It is the mind and spirit responding to something that has not yet fully manifested but is already in motion. And ignoring that response does not stop the process. It only removes preparation. There is also something important about emotional residue. Some dreams do not fade easily because they leave behind a feeling, a sense of unease, confusion, urgency, or reflection. And even if the content is not fully remembered, the emotional impact remains. That emotional residue is often where meaning is found. Because emotion is often the language through which deeper awareness is communicated when logic is not fully engaged. It bypasses reasoning and reaches attention directly. It creates a sense that something is important even when it cannot yet be fully explained. And that feeling should not always be dismissed. Not every emotion requires action, but some require reflection. This is where discernment becomes necessary. Not emotional reaction, but thoughtful awareness. A willingness to pause and consider whether something is simply random or whether it carries a message that deserves attention. Because not everything that appears during rest remains irrelevant during wakefulness. Some things follow into thought. Some influence mood. Some shape decisions subtly without immediate recognition. And when something begins to influence waking life in small ways, it is no longer just an isolated experience. It becomes part of ongoing awareness. This is why the urgency exists. Not to create fear, but to encourage attention before patterns deepen. Before what is symbolic becomes experiential. Before what is warning becomes reality. Because warnings are not meant to frighten. They are meant to prepare. And preparation always begins with recognition. So, when certain dreams repeat, when certain symbols return, when certain emotions linger beyond sleep, it is worth asking whether something deeper is being communicated. Not every dream will carry meaning, but the ones that do should not be ignored. Because what is being revealed in quiet moments may be pointing towards something that requires attention in waking life. And recognizing it early can change everything that follows. Among the most commonly experienced dream patterns is the sensation of falling. It arrives suddenly without warning, often creating a brief but intense feeling of helplessness or loss of control. Even though it ends within seconds and the body awakens before impact, the emotional effect can linger far longer than expected. A sense of instability, a subtle discomfort, a feeling that something deeper may be being communicated. This type of dream is rarely about the physical act itself. It is symbolic. Falling often reflects a condition of imbalance. An internal state where something is not fully stable, not fully grounded, or not fully aligned. It may not point to visible failure or external collapse, but to something within that requires attention before it becomes more pronounced in outward life. And this is where the warning begins, because instability does not always announce itself loudly. It often develops quietly, in thoughts that are not fully organized, in decisions that are rushed or inconsistent, in emotional responses that shift too quickly under pressure. These internal patterns may not seem serious in isolation, but together they form a structure that lacks full stability. And what is unstable internally eventually reveals itself externally. This dream often appears in moments when control feels divided, not completely lost, but not fully secured either. When direction is being considered but not fully established. When intentions exist but execution feels inconsistent. It is not necessarily a sign of failure, but a reflection of imbalance that requires correction. Because elevation, whether in life, responsibility, or personal growth, always requires stability. And stability cannot exist in divided focus. There may be areas where strength is present, and other areas where weakness quietly persists. Outwardly, things may appear functional, even progressing. But internally, there may be tension between what is intended and what is consistently maintained. And this tension creates vulnerability. The dream of falling often highlights that vulnerability, not to create fear, but to create awareness. Because falling is not only about descent, it is about lack of support. It is about something not being strong enough to hold weight. And in symbolic terms, this can represent emotional grounding, mental clarity, or consistency in behavior. When any of these are weakened, even slightly, the sense of stability is affected. And the mind often translates that internal condition into symbolic experiences during sleep. This is why such dreams can feel so real. This is why such dreams can feel so real. Because they are not random imagination, they are often reflections of internal conditions being processed in symbolic form. The feeling of falling represents the feeling of losing balance in some area of life that requires steadiness. And when balance is affected, even subtly, awareness becomes important. Because instability does not correct itself automatically, it requires recognition. It requires adjustment. It requires a return to alignment in areas that may have drifted off center. Without that correction, small imbalances can expand over time. A slight inconsistency can grow into repeated patterns. A minor lack of focus can develop into ongoing distraction. A small compromise can become a regular habit. And what once felt manageable can begin to affect overall direction. This is why the dream carries weight. It is not simply about fear of falling. It is about the condition of stability before falling ever happens. And that is the critical point, because awareness given early allows correction before consequence. It allows reflection B. E for disruption. It allows realignment before imbalance turns into visible instability. The dream serves as a reminder to examine foundations, not just external structures, but internal ones. Thoughts, habits, decisions, consistency. Emotional grounding. Because when these are strong, stability is maintained even under pressure. But when they are weakened, even slightly, the feeling of falling becomes symbolic of what is already developing beneath the surface. And that is why this dream should not be ignored. Not because it guarantees failure, but because it signals the need for strengthening, a call to restore balance where it may be slipping, a reminder to stabilize what is beginning to feel uncertain. Because once stability is restored internally, the sense of falling disappears, not only in dreams, but in experience. Not only in dreams, but in experience. And what remains is steadiness, clarity, and grounded direction moving forward. There are dreams that do not simply disturb the mind, they pursue it. Among the most emotionally intense of these is the experience of being chased. It often carries urgency, fear, confusion, or a sense of not being able to stop or turn around safely. Even after waking, the feeling can remain, as though something unfinished has followed beyond sleep. This type of dream is rarely about a literal threat. It is about pressure. Not always visible pressure, but internal pressure. Something unresolved, something unaddressed, something that continues to exist beneath the surface of daily life. It may not be immediately recognized during waking hours, but in symbolic form, it becomes undeniable. Because what is not confronted does not disappear. It persists quietly, often shifting into thoughts, emotions, or patterns of avoidance. And over time, what is avoided begins to feel like something that is following, not physically, but mentally and emotionally. The mind translates unresolved tension into pursuit because it has not yet been brought into clarity. This is why being chased in a dream often reflects avoidance. Avoidance of a decision that has not been made. Avoidance of a responsibility that has been delayed. Avoidance of a truth that has been acknowledged, but not addressed. And avoidance does not eliminate pressure. It sustains it. Because what is not faced continues to exist in the background of awareness. It may not always be at the center of attention, but it does not leave. It waits, it lingers, it resurfaces in moments of quiet or vulnerability, often appearing stronger the longer it ignored. This is how pressure builds silently, not through sudden events, but through accumulation. Small delays, small postponements, small hesitations that seem harmless individually, but collectively form a weight that cannot be easily ignored. And when that weight is not processed consciously, it often appears symbolically in dreams as pursuit. The feeling of being chased represents more than fear. It represents unfinished engagement with something that requires attention. It is the mind's way of expressing that something is still active, still unresolved, still demanding acknowledgement. And the longer it is delayed, the more intense the feeling becomes. Because unresolved matters do not remain static. They grow in emotional presence. They become more noticeable in thought patterns. They began to influence decisions indirectly, and even without direct confrontation, they shape internal experiences. This is why such dreams often feel persistent, not because the situation is physically changing, but because the internal awareness of it is increasing. The mind continues to register something as unresolved, and that unresolved state creates pressure that cannot be ignored. And indefinitely. Eventually, what is avoided in waking life demands recognition in symbolic form. And that is what makes this dream significant. It is not a punishment, it is a reflection of areas where attention has been delayed, areas where responsibility has been postponed, areas where clarity has not yet been fully established. Because clarity removes pursuit, when something is understood and addressed, it no longer needs to follow. When a decision is made, uncertainty loses its influence. When responsibility is accepted, pressure begins to dissolve. The feeling of being chased is often replaced by peace once the underlying issue is resolved. But until that happens, the experience remains active. This is why awareness is essential. Because ignoring the feeling does not resolve it. It only postpones engagement. And postponement allows pressure to build further, making eventual confrontation feel heavier than it needed to be. This dream serves as a signal that something requires attention. Not necessarily something external, but something internal that has been left unresolved for too long. It may be a decision, a responsibility, a conversation, or even a pattern of avoidance itself. Whatever form it takes, the message remains consistent. It cannot be outrun indefinitely, because what is not addressed continues to influence from behind the scenes, and only when it is faced directly does the sense of pursuit end. What remains after that is relief, clarity, and a release from the internal pressure that once felt constant, allowing forward movement without the weight of what was left unfinished. There are dreams that do not create fear in the moment, but create emptiness upon waking. Among these is the experience of losing something important. It may be a possession, a person, a document, or something whose identity is not always fully clear in the dream itself, but its value is unmistakable. The emotional response is often immediate: confusion, urgency, sadness, or helpless searching. And even after waking, a sense of loss can linger. This type of dream is rarely about the physical object itself. It is about value, attention, and neglect. Because in symbolic terms, losing something important often reflects areas in life where attention has been divided or reduced. Something that once held minority may no longer be receiving the same level of care, focus, or awareness, not necessarily through intentional disregard, but through gradual distraction. And neglect rarely happens suddenly. It develops quietly. A shift in focus here, a delay in responsibility there, a small reduction in consistency over time. None of these moments may seem significant on their own. In fact, they may feel completely harmless in isolation, but when combined over time, they create distance between what is important and the attention it requires. And that distance becomes symbolic loss. Because what is not consistently valued begins to feel distant, not because it has disappeared, but because attention has moved elsewhere. And the mind often translates that emotional or structural distance into the experience of losing something meaningful. This is why the dream can feel so impactful. It reflects not only fear of loss, but awareness of neglect. Something valuable may still exist, but its importance is not being fully maintained in practice. And when something important is not maintained, it begins to weaken in influence. Not immediately, but gradually, not visibly at first, but internally over time. This is where the warning lies. Because loss does not always begin with disappearance. It often begins with disoccurrence. It often begins with neglect. Neglect of time, neglect of focus, neglect of responsibility, neglect of consistency. And once neglect becomes repeated, it reshapes priorities without conscious awareness. What once felt essential may begin to feel secondary. What once received full attention may begin to receive partial attention. And what once was carefully protected may begin to be taken for granted. This shift does not happen suddenly. It happens through repetition. And repetition changes perception. This is why the dream of losing something important often carries emotional intensity. It is not just about the object, it is about the realization that something valuable may not be receiving the attention it requires. It is a reflection of internal awareness pointing toward imbalance, because attention is not infinite, it is directed. And whatever receives consistent attention becomes strengthened. Whatever receives reduced attention becomes weakened. This is a natural pattern, not only in external life, but also in internal alignment. And when something important is weakened through neglect, the sense of loss becomes symbolic of that weakening process. This is where awareness becomes critical, because recognizing neglect early allows correction before actual loss occurs. It allows priorities to be rebalanced. It allows focus to be restored where it has drifted. It allows what is important to be reestablished before its influence is diminished further. But if ignored, neglect continues silently. It does not announce itself. It does not demand immediate correction. It simply continues to shift attention away from what matters until the imbalance becomes more noticeable. And by the time it becomes obvious, recovery often requires more effort than prevention would have. This is why the dream should not be dismissed. Not because something has already been lost, but because something may require renewed attention. It is a reminder to examine priorities, to ask what has been receiving less focus recently, what has been delayed repeatedly, what has been unintentionally set aside. Because these areas often hold more importance than is realized in the moment. And once attention is restored, something changes. Clarity returns. Value is reestablished. Connection is strengthened. What once felt distant becomes close again. What once felt weakened becomes stable, and what once felt at risk is brought back into alignment. Because what is intentionally maintained is not easily lost, and what is restored with awareness becomes stronger than before. There are dreams that do not disturb with movement or urgency, but with absence. Absence of clarity, absence of direction, absence of visible understanding. Among these is the experience of darkness, where surroundings cannot be clearly seen, where direction feels uncertain, and where movement feels hesitant or unclear. And even after waking, the impression of that uncertainty can remain. This type of dream is rarely about fear in a literal sense. It is about confusion, not sudden confusion, but gradual uncertainty. A state where clarity is not fully available, where decisions feel less defined, and where direction is not as firm as it once felt. It reflects moments where understanding is not complete, even if progress is still being attempted. Because darkness does not always mean something is wrong. It often means something is not yet clear, and clarity is not automatic. It develops through awareness, reflection, and alignment. When those elements are reduced, even slightly, the sense of direction becomes less stable. And the mind often expresses that lack of clarity through symbolic darkness in dreams. This is why such dreams feel disorienting, because they mirror internal uncertainty. There may be areas in life where decisions are being made without full understanding, or where movement is continuing without complete certainty, or where pressure exists to proceed, even when clarity has not fully formed. And when movement continues without clarity, confusion naturally follows. This confusion is not always visible during waking hours. It may appear as hesitation, overthinking, or difficulty focusing. It may show up as delays in decision-making or uncertainty about direction, but in symbolic form, it becomes more pronounced, expressed as darkness, where nothing is fully visible or defined. This is the warning within the dream, not that movement should stop, but that clarity must be restored. Because movement without clarity often leads to delay, not progress. It creates cycles of uncertainty, where effort is present but direction is unstable. And over time, this can lead to frustration, not because progress is impossible, but because direction is unclear. This is why darkness should not always be interpreted as danger. Sometimes it is simply a signal that understanding has not yet been fully established. And when understanding is incomplete, hesitation becomes natural, but prolonged hesitation can slow progress. This is where awareness becomes important, because confusion is not permanent. It is temporary when addressed. It can be reduced through reflection, slow decisions, and intentional alignment. But if ignored, it can persist, creating repeated cycles of uncertainty. And repeated uncertainty often leads to delay, not because progress is impossible, but because direction is not firmly established. This is why the dream serves as a reminder to slow down where necessary, to reassess direction, to ensure that movement is not happening in complete uncertainty. Because clarity is what transforms effort into progress. Without clarity, effort can become scattered. With clarity, effort becomes focused, and focused effort produces stability. This is the key message within the dream of darkness. Not fear, but correction. Not warning of destruction, but warning of destruction. But warning of delay caused by lack of understanding. A reminder that before moving further, clarity must be strengthened. Because when clarity is weak, even strong effort can feel ineffective. But when clarity is strong, even small effort produces direction. This is why reflection becomes necessary in moments of symbolic darkness, not to stop movement completely, but to ensure movement is aligned, to ensure that decisions are not being made in confusion, but in understanding. And once clarity is restored, something shifts. Uncertainty begins to reduce. Direction becomes more defined. Confidence in movement returns. What once felt unclear begins to take shape. What once felt uncertain becomes structured. And what once felt like delay begins to transform into steady progress. Because darkness is not permanent. It is only the absence of clarity waiting to be restored. There comes a point where awareness can no longer remain passive, where understanding is no longer enough on its own, where recognition must turn into response, because warnings are never meant to be stored. They are meant to be acted upon. And this is that point. Every dream carries weight only if it is acknowledged. Every message holds meaning only if it is reflected upon. Every warning serves a purpose only if it leads to adjustment. Without response, even the clearest signals lose their effect, not because they are unimportant, but because they are ignored. This is why action matters. Not emotional reaction, but conscious response. Not fear-based interpretation, but thoughtful reflection. A willingness to pause and examine whether something being revealed internally is pointing towards something that requires attention externally. Because not every dream is meant to predict, but many are meant to prepare. And preparation is always an active process. It begins with honesty. Honesty about what feels unsettled. Honesty about what keeps repeating. Honesty about what has been ignored or delayed. Because without honesty, nothing can be corrected. This is the moment to take those patterns seriously, not to overreact, but to pay attention, to recognize that recurring symbols, lingering emotions, or repeated themes may be pointing toward areas that require adjustment before they develop further. Because delay in response often leads to greater intensity later. What is subtle now may become louder if ignored. What is small now may become more visible if overlooked. What is internal now may eventually reflect externally if not addressed. This is why awareness must lead somewhere. It must lead to reflection. It must lead to correction. It must lead to correction. It must lead to alignment. Not immediately in dramatic ways, but consistently through small intentional adjustments. This is how prevention works, not by fear, but by attention. Because attention is what changes direction before consequences form. It allows correction before patterns solidify. It creates space for understanding before confusion becomes deeper. And this is the responsibility within the message, to take what has been revealed and respond appropriately, to examine areas of instability where falling may be symbolized, to confront areas of avoidance where pressure may be building, to restore attention where neglect may be forming, to seek clarity where confusion may be increasing. Because every dream carries a mirror of something within. And ignoring the reflection does not change what is being reflected. It only delays the opportunity to correct it. This is why response must be intentional. Not rushed, not emotional, but steady and clear. A decision to bring awareness into alignment with action. A decision to ensure that what has been revealed is not left unattended. Because what is unattended continues to develop. And what continues to develop without correction eventually becomes unavoidable. But it does not have to reach that stage. Awareness already creates an opportunity for change. Reflection already opens the door for correction. And recognition already provides the first step toward realignment. The only thing required now is response. To listen to what has been revealed internally, to evaluate what may need adjustment externally, to make the necessary changes before patterns deepen further, because what is addressed early remains manageable. What is addressed late becomes more complex, and what is ignored often becomes unavoidable. This is the final call within the message. Do not ignore what has been revealed. Take it seriously, reflect on it deeply, and respond with intention. Because once awareness is acted upon, clarity strengthens, confusion reduces, and direction becomes more stable. And what once appeared as warning transforms into guidance that leads towards stability, understanding, and alignment moving forward.